My first brush with mnemonic devices was in primary school when I learned how to spell the word because with the following sentence: Betty eats cakes and uncle sells eggs. Because. Well, this device was so effective, I instantly and permanently learned how to spell a word that was super long and complicated for a 6-year-old. Mnemonics have been used by humankind for centuries to remember things and for far more complex subjects than primary school spelling. But at what point does the burden of learning and remembering these mnemonics outweigh the burden of remembering the information they're supposed to help you remember? And how can you use mnemonics to effectively aid your learning? Well, today I'm speaking with Chase DeMarco, the host of the Medical Mnemonist podcast, about the right way to use these memory devices, particularly if you're a pre-med or med student preparing for your next major exam. And here is what he had to say. Okay, Chase, tell me, what are medical mnemonics and how can students use them to memorize tough content?
So mnemonics are just a name for memory devices, tools that you can use to help you remember different things. A lot of students are probably aware of like an acronym, which is a very basic mnemonic. It's using, initialization or some sort of shortened version of maybe a sentence or a topic. But unfortunately, those also are not really good with memory. You might remember it for the next exam, and then you're probably going to forget it afterwards unless it's really quirky and weird. So we really try to focus on visual mnemonics because just like a picture is worth 1,000 words, you can remember a lot of details with an image and remember it for much longer. So when we talk about medical mnemonics, we're really focusing on these visual memory devices and tools to help you remember more complicated context and just how things work within medicine.
Okay, cool. Well, can you give me an example of how you might construct such a mnemonic for a concept a student has to learn?
Sure. I would say that you probably want to start off with an outline. So memory champions that I've interviewed on the show before, they are really good at just making things quickly because they've been doing this for a long time. They have a lot of practice. And sort of like learning a language, the more time and effort you put into it, the better you will become at creating these mnemonics. But for students, especially starting off, I always recommend that you draw out some sort of outline, such as if you're looking at a chart of data, you have an outline there. You have something to follow and something to refer back to later on. But if you're creating your own, you can write in a memory journal and just sort of have a list of the actual topics, the actual concepts that you want to remember. And then next to it, you can put a little, even if it's stick figure drawing, you're the only one that needs to see it, some sort of way for you to remember which mnemonic goes with which word, which term, which concept. And by doing that, you're kind of building up your visual dictionary. So the more practice and time you put into these, the better you'll become at it, the more fluent, the quicker you can create new ones. But I would say starting off with some sort of goal, some sort of plan is the best way to begin when you're just starting off with these techniques.
I love that you said that those memory masters, what did you call them? Those
The memory champions?
memory champions, that it comes down to practicing. Now, I know some of them do have those incredible memories, but it goes to show that, with a bit of practice, you can become just as, talented with mnemonics as they are.
And that's the funny thing is if you ask any of them, they're going to say, I have a terrible memory. That's why I started using these devices. So it
Right.
shows that anyone can use these. If
Right.
you watch someone on TV or look up the memory championships and see what they can remember, and this can be, hundreds of playing cards in order that they memorize within a couple seconds or a minute, or long strings of names and different associated factors with these names, or whole poems verbatim.
Right.
They're not special in any way. And even MRI studies have shown that their brains are no different than ours. They've
Yeah.
just practiced these tools and they understand the concepts behind them. So with enough practice and starting these practices earlier for students is going to provide a lot better skill that they can use more effectively later on.
That is very cool. All right. So, in what contexts and for what learning challenges do you find mnemonics pay the greatest dividends?
I would say that there are kind of two schools of thought here. Some mnemonics instructors that I've interviewed really advocate to use mnemonics for everything, but they have a lot of time into this, and students might not be able to develop their skills as quickly, especially if they're already in school, if they're already in medical school and they're very busy. It's difficult to really build up that skill to that level.
Mhm.
So I would say probably for most students, if you don't have the ability or time to do this beforehand, to learn these skills beforehand, then at least do it for those topics that are really challenging you, the ones that you keep missing, keep mixing up, keep getting wrong on test questions. So you can really focus on your weak points and then utilize these strengthening exercises
Yeah.
to really focus on those parts and get them right the next time.
Okay, cool. Well, on the flip side of that coin, when might mnemonics be a waste of time? So, in contexts where it's like you have to remember the memory device and the knowledge that it represents, and that just becomes more cumbersome and more work than it's worth. So, what would those contexts be?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest issues I hear from medical students that I've tutored in the past is just it takes so much time when you're starting off with these skills. You
Yeah.
really have to think of how you're going to lay out the device, what individual visual marker, we're going to call it, this visual aid that you have associated with a particular topic. And creating them can take some time and it takes a lot of cognitive effort. So you're probably not going to be able to just, create hundreds of them in a day. But when it becomes burdensome to do that, then it kind of has diminishing returns. You're spending too much time on creating the device, not enough time on actually studying it afterwards. And you have to remember to study these later on, like using spaced repetition, which I think we'll get into a little later. So it's really individualized. And again, the sooner a learner can start to implement the skills and techniques early on and get used to it, get a flow, see how they work, because the visuals you create are really going to be independent to or personal to you. Making them personal is stronger because you have some sort of association with it yourself. And that can take a lot of time to do. You can use generic markers, such as ones created from someone else that you might find in a book or a video, such as Sketchy Medicine or Picmonic. But when they're more general, they don't have that same personal touch that you can add to it. And it might be harder for you to remember them later on. So you really need to just kind of practice for a while, test them out, develop your skill. But when you're spending too much time on the creation of the markers and not enough time on studying and spaced repetition, then you might want to weigh that balance a little bit more.
Right. Well, it sounds to me like this is a skill that if you really invest in can be incredibly powerful as a learning tool. But if you just dabble in mnemonics, it can almost be burdensome depending on what you're learning.
It definitely can be. I know
Mm.
I've interviewed someone that he says he can memorize a million different terms and techniques and items within a single large mnemonic that he creates, which uses a lot of different techniques, but he combines them all together and elaborates on them. And I mean, that's very impressive. I can't do that. But for someone starting off, they might want to start off a little bit smaller, just focus on your weak points and then kind of go from there. And you can always add to them later on.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Well, you dropped the name spaced repetition. And since Brainscape is super obsessed with that as a learning device and our whole platform is built around it, tell me, what role does spaced repetition play in helping pre-med or med students master large volumes of information?
It's extremely important. It's one of the few strong evidence-based techniques for learning. One of the early shows I did actually on the Medical Mnemonist was with a Dr. Megan Samraki, who is a co-host on the Learning Scientist podcast, which is a really cool podcast. It's a group of cognitive psychologists that really specifically look at learning techniques and what the evidence shows. So spaced repetition is up there with the top 6-7 techniques that we have a lot of research that has demonstrated a great benefit. And using the spacing effect, which is, recalling the information specifically at several times over a long period of time, not just cramming before an exam, looking at it 3, 4, 5 times before you need to utilize it for an exam, for instance. But then also the rehearsal part of it is not just looking over your notes, it's having to actively recall the information. So flashcards are a good way to do this, one of the most common ways, because you can't see what the answer is on the other side until you get it right and flip it over, right? So you have to actually, basically, if you can close your eyes and recall what the technique is, what the term is, what the process is, then you know it. Then you can answer it on a quiz. If you're just reading over your notes, well, you're going to recognize it because you've looked over your notes before, but that doesn't mean you actually know the material that you could tell someone how it works if they were to ask you, or answer that quiz question without that visual primer of your notes. So really using spaced repetition is extremely powerful. And then you can add mnemonics to your spaced repetition practice. So these can go hand in hand. One of the techniques that I recommend to students is arbitrary numbers that work for me, but I call it the 1-1-3-1-1 method. And that means to do your first repetition within an hour, your second one within a day, second one within 3 days, 1 week, 1 month. So you have 1 hour, 1 day, 3 days, 1 week, 1 month. And that's just a number that seems to work for me. But other people can add more or subtract and have less, depending on what works for them. Especially by the maybe third repetition, if I still don't have the material very well down, then I'm going to add a mnemonic to it as well. So then I can remember and rehearse that mnemonic over the next couple of repetitions as well.
Right.
So really, these can go hand in hand. They're just using different parts of your memory to remember complicated material.
Oh, that's cool. Right, so aside from mnemonics and spaced repetition, what other study hacks do you recommend to your audience?
Well, probably the most important thing that students vastly overlook is just really the planning stages. So setting your goals, knowing what your goals actually are, and making them specific. So you can use SMART goals, for instance, which is an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. Now you have specific goals. You have this time period you need to remember X amount of information in to reach a certain goal. Once you have that down, then you know how to get there, or at least you can make a plan to get there. If you make it very arbitrary, very general, such as a New Year's resolution, that's why no one follows up with them, because they're just like, oh, I want to go to the gym more often this year. They don't say, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week for 20 minutes each, and make it as specific as possible.
Right.
Then you're more likely to actually follow up with it, and you have a way to assess yourself if you aren't making it enough time. Or enough times a week, or for the duration that you set. So you really have to keep yourself honest, and being able to set the goals, to plan for them, and make sure that you're staying on track is extremely important.
Right. That's such great advice. I mean, we do a lot of content at Brainscape for people studying for the bar exam and for nursing exams, NCLEX, for the medical exam, MCAT. And one of our biggest pieces of advice, which we write a lot of content on, is the importance of a solid test plan. Not a test plan, a study plan. And, going into your studies without one is just like, it's ridiculous. It's like trying to get from A to B without a roadmap
Yeah, but that's the thing, is most students have never really been taught how to learn properly. They just kind of go at it from the way they've done it before, the way they did it in elementary school, middle school, for medical students, the way they did it through pre-med. And that's not necessarily going to work as you get to more complex materials and more quantity of materials as well. They always say that going to med school is like drinking out of a fire hose. So you really need to adjust your plan, adjust your abilities to match the content ahead of you.
Yeah. All right. Finally, how does your website and podcast, The Medical Mnemonist, help healthcare students or even working professionals excel in their learning?
We go over a lot of the techniques that we've discussed here, as well as many others. We go over things from planning and prioritization of materials and how to actually assess different materials, to setting up your schedules and how to make sure to assess yourself, to monitor yourself, to make sure you're on track. We go over all of the different types of mnemonic devices, which we haven't really covered here. But for instance, there's the PEG system, there's a major system, there's a story method, there's the memory palace, a couple others. We cover the other evidence-based techniques, which include spaced repetition, but there's also interleaving, there's dual coding, there's concrete examples. So by going through the past episodes, and granted the show's been out for about 2.5 years now, so there's a lot of past episodes, but you can search it just like a Google browser and look for specific topics. Actually just released a 6-part series for each episode. We cover a different type of mnemonic and give homework assignments at the end, so they can follow along each week. They can record their progress in their memory journal and really start to develop these techniques bit by bit. So hopefully with all of these prioritization, goal setting, and learning techniques, they can advance their skills as learners. And those skills are not just useful for school, they're useful for every aspect of life.
Right. I feel like it should be a requisite course in high school, or even up before, just how to learn, how to study. These are things we're not taught. We just sort of figure it out for ourselves. And all too often we learn inefficient techniques. And so this is great.
completely agreed. Actually, one of the guests, a memory champion by the name of Nelson Dellis, came out with a book specifically for teaching memory techniques to your children.
Oh,
Like,
cool.
that's perfect. The sooner you can learn, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. God, it would make life so much easier. Yeah. Well, Chase, thank you so much for speaking with me today. This has been great. I think I'm going to dig into some of those mnemonics because Lord knows I need help remembering things all the time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So there you have it, the best way to use mnemonic devices straight from the expert's mouth. Well, as I mentioned, Chase is the host of the Medical Mnemonist podcast, but what I didn't say is that this podcast is a production of Med School Coach, which provides pre-med and medical schools admissions consulting services and MCAT tutoring. So if you need assistance with acing your MCAT and getting into medical school, I encourage you to check them out. Details below. If you are preparing to take on the MCAT, make sure you get Brainscape certified MCAT flashcards in your corner. We have distilled down and organized the science content you need to know into an awesome collection of smart flashcards, which are proven to help you learn and remember content twice as fast as traditional study methods. Armed with these, you'll keep up that healthy cadence of daily review that is so essential for landing high scores on the MCAT. And for even more guidance, check out the other videos we have on Brainscape's medical channel, including more interviews like this one. And go to our MCAT Academy for free study guides on everything you need to know to prepare for and ace the MCAT. These tools, together with your ambition and hard work, is everything you need to rise to your challenge.